Baptist Church in downtown Kinston, North Carolina. And welcome to our Wesley Bible class. Today we're going to be studying Deuteronomy chapter 4, which is a speech. So I'm not going to read it verbatim very much, but there are some interesting parts of it and things that were apparently prescient and just reminders. People need reminders. So this is a speech from Moses. So he opens it up with, "So now Israel, give heed to the statements and ordinances that I am teaching you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that the Lord your God of your ancestors is giving you. You must neither add anything to what I command, nor take anything away from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God with which I am charging you," which is kind of interesting because if you look at what Judaism did with the Ten Commandments, they kind of added two. There is a tendency on the part of any religious institution, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, any, to take your basic document and expand it so that there are things in there that weren't necessarily meant to be along the way. But the scholars have looked at it and people have asked for interpretations. Well, what does it really mean to keep the Sabbath, okay? And then you've got the Pharisees who give you a very lengthy description of what it means to keep the Sabbath. And, in the time of Moses, I'm not sure that was anything in there, And then you get into all the kosher, which is not in the Ten Commandments. There's nothing in there about doing all you can to separate yourself from Gentiles and the Gentile community and being unclean because you are in a Gentile's house or something like that. There are a lot of, like, even touching the dead makes you unclean, but there's nothing about that in the Ten Commandments. So as you go through this, you see that when God says don't add anything to it, don't take anything away from it, it's just human nature. Okay? When I was growing up, the church that I belonged to added a lot of things to the Ten Commandments. No smoking, not even mentioned in the Ten Commandments. Okay? No drinking, and that wasn't in the Ten Commandments. No dancing, and that wasn't in the Ten Commandments. And about movies, can't go to movies? I mean, that wasn't in the Ten Commandments either. So people tend to pile on. Okay, just be aware of that. And what the thing that you've got to be aware of is that Jesus, in his discussions with the Pharisees, was very critical of the things that they had added on. You've made this religion really, really hard to do, and you've opened up ways that God can condemn you. And why did you do that? Because God was cool with you doing this other stuff before, So if you get back to the basic 10, then the religion is pretty basic. But if you start adding on this and adding on that and piling on, and what is the thing that motivates us to do something like that? There is a thing that motivates us to do that.
Sometimes it's fear.
Fear is one thing, okay? And there's a lot of fear in here. A lot of fear. Okay? People were afraid of making God angry. And the more rules you've got,
I think
the
it's
angrier
like
God can
keeping
be.
people out,
Yeah.
making rules for your group and keeping people out of your group.
Why was I not allowed to go to dances when I was a kid? Because that would put me in contact with other kids from other religions. Okay? I had a discussion with a relative about kosher. And if you talk to people who observe that, they'll talk to you about how it's a healthier diet, and it is, okay? But the primary function of kosher is to make sure that you don't sit down to dinner with somebody who's not of the faith. So they can't influence you, okay? So that's the primary function of kosher, is to keep you separate. All right. Now I've been to seders, and you know, there was no problem with it. I don't have any dietary restrictions, obviously, but you know, I was very pleased that they opened their home to me. Okay, but I couldn't invite them to my 4th of July barbecue. So, you know, just there is that division, that distinction, you know. People have, if you want to interact with somebody of a very strict Christian faith or Jewish faith, it's okay for you to come over to their side, but it's not okay for them to come over to your side, okay? And that's why it was vitally important at the beginning of the Christian church that the revelation was made that all things are kosher. That you can sit down and eat in a Gentile's house. You can eat their food and drink their drink and converse with them as a means of opening up your faith to them. So one of the hallmarks, and it's kind of interesting, but one of the hallmarks of Christianity is that it loosened up all these rules and regulations for Jews, and the motivation for that, especially if you study what Apostle Paul was writing to the churches, especially the Jewish community, is that if we want this thing to grow, if we want to expand and allow the salvation that Christ affords to all people, then we have to be to all people to all people. And you have to respect their culture, okay? You don't go in with a disrespect or condescending attitude or anything like that. Somebody invites you to a meal, you sit down and eat with them. It's like the old Irish proverb, if someone insults you by offering you a drink, swallow the insult. So, but that way you can have a conversation, you can interact, and that's. I dated a Jewish girl once. And she wanted to see a tent revival, which was going on. So she went to a tent revival, and the Holy Spirit really worked on her. And she went down to the altar, not really understanding anything about this, and gave her heart to Christ, okay? And when she came up, she wanted to light a cigarette. I said, no, you can't do that anymore. And that was the end of her Christianity. And my dating experience.
We'll understand it better by and by.
We'll understand it better by and by. But anyway, and it's terrible because you can throw this stuff at people and just absolutely ruin their salvation. We need to understand that the primary draw of the Lord is grace and not fear. But rules are made for fear. And that's what Paul was trying to get at in a lot of his writings, that we are free from the law. It doesn't mean that we're lawless, but it does mean that there are a lot of restrictive rules that are stupid, that have nothing to do with salvation. So,
And the Jews fought it as hard as they could. I mean,
Yes.
and still do. I mean, some,
well, you can't take a libertine attitude into an Orthodox synagogue and think that you're going to convert people. It just doesn't work that way. So you have to be respectful of their faith. I've had conversations with Muslims, and man, let me tell you, that's a one-way conversation. They were all about giving me a Quran, but I couldn't give them a Bible. And I said, how do you know you're better? How do you know your religion is is better than Christianity or Judaism even, if you don't open our books and look at them, you know. But he wouldn't hear of it. Wouldn't hear of it. I had to take the Quran. I've got several. I haven't read through them all yet, but mostly because I don't understand Arabic. But it's just interesting that Moses threw in there, don't add anything to it. But we do. Okay? And every time we do, we make the religion harder and harder and harder for both ourselves and anybody else who might be attracted to it. You've seen for yourself what the Lord did with regard to the Baal of Peor, how the Lord your God destroyed from among you everyone who followed the Baal of Peor, while those of you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today. Well, that's not true, because that generation died. Okay, the people who were worshiping Baal at Peor were killed at the time, okay, and then the other ones who decided not to go into the promised land were not alive to that day. Moses is speaking to a generation later. Just as the Lord my God has charged with me, I now teach you statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to occupy. You must observe them diligently, for this will show your wisdom and discernment to the people who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and discerning people. For what other great nation has a God so near to it, as the Lord our God is whenever we call on him? And what other great nation has statutes and ordinances, just as this entire law that I am setting before you today? Well, there were other cultures that had laws. As a matter of fact, some of the laws that you find in the Ten Commandments, you also find in the laws of Hammurabi, a much more ancient culture. And it was in Iraq. But they found this stele of engravings, and the law, it was in cuneiform, but the laws of Hammurabi are not all that distinct from the Ten Commandments and some of the other laws that were generated. So if you really want to be honest about a lot of this stuff, the laws that were adopted in Judaism didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened in a cluster of cultures, and they influenced each other. So while the laws were similar, the laws in Judaism were modified for a worship of one God instead of multiple gods. But at the base, a lot of them were the same laws that you saw in Egypt. Egypt had a huge volume of laws that were already on the books. And most of them were just common sense to make a culture livable, you know. Laws about marriage, laws about how to raise your kids, laws about gender specificity. All of these kinds of things were already in other cultures. And the fact that the Jews had similar laws, it shouldn't be surprising. So just to say that they all came from the inspiration of the Lord, well, yeah, maybe God inspired you to copy somebody's stuff, you know. That could happen, you know. And it's something that I think a lot of people, when they look at Judaism and Christianity, they think of the uniqueness of these faiths. But we are all created in God's image. Everybody. And it shouldn't be surprising that the God who created everybody in God's image would not talk to everybody one way or another.
He inspired the laws from those other cultures.
Right. Right.
And you know.
Yeah. And you know, you look at it and you say, well, how come this culture is so successful? Well, maybe they've got a body of laws. What makes our culture so successful? We're a nation ostensibly of law. Okay? And sometimes we don't see it that way, But ostensibly, we are a nation of law. It's one of the things that draws people from other countries to come here, because we're not a law of capriciousness. You know, we've got a thing going on in Venezuela now where the dictator has been defeated by a 70-30 vote, and he's not conceding. And people are in the streets. But in a nation of laws, we should be respecting the vote and making sure that the vote is right.
So what do you think they're gonna do over there?
I think eventually, the key thing in Venezuela is going to be what the military does. If the military does the same thing that happened in Russia, where they decided that they were not going to crush the people, the military decided they were not going to crush the people, then Maduro's going to be overthrown. That's what happened in Romania, by the way, with Ceausescu. He and his wife were summarily executed because the people just got fed up with him being the only law in the land, and he was an oppressive law. So if the people are fed up enough, this is the thing a lot of people don't realize. We became the nation that we did because our forefathers and mothers got fed up. Okay? And we changed the place. And one of the things that outrages me about all these people that are coming across our border from these other places, most of them are military-age men. And if they really wanted their country to succeed, they would make their country succeed. They would get fed up and do something about it, like we did. And I'm feeling like there's nothing wrong with sending them back to where they were to learn the lessons that they learned in this country. When people get fed up, we don't have to put up with stuff. You know, we schedule our revolutions, and that's a good thing.
In the Venezuela situation, is the CIA involved, and who do we support?
Now, who would know that?
You?
No, I wouldn't. I think they don't need to be. I think they don't need to be. Okay? But if you gave the people of Iran half a chance, they would throw the mullahs out. They would throw the mullahs out. But they're not fed up enough. They're not fed up enough. I know they're fed up, but not enough. And that's another lesson that I think populations have a hard time learning, is that whether or not you have a democratic system, the population will always bear the responsibility for the government they have. So if you're going to bear the responsibility for the government that you have, you might as well figure out what kind of government you want. But those are hard lessons to learn, and sometimes they're deadly. So, you know, if people have some trepidation, I understand that. So did we. Okay. And he says, but take care and watch yourselves closely so as neither to forget the things that your eyes have seen or to let them slip from your minds all the days of your life. Basically what Moses is doing, he's taking them back through their history and reiterating what happened in Egypt and what happened with crossing the Red Sea and what happened especially in Mount Horeb, where they saw the mountain on fire and they heard the voice of God. You know, don't forget that. Don't forget that. Well, he's saying that to a generation that didn't see that. Okay? But one of the things that you'll notice if you ever participate in a Seder, they don't speak of themselves in the past tense. They don't speak of themselves as if that's happened to their ancestors. They speak of themselves in the present tense. When we crossed the Red Sea, when we went into the Promised Land, when God gave us the law. Okay? So it's not what God did with your ancestors, it's what's God doing with you now. And that's what Moses is saying. You have to teach your children all of these things, but teach it to them because it is happening to you. It is part of your present history. And that's something I think we lost sight of in this, or we're losing sight of in this country. is we don't put the issues of the revolution or the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence into the heads of our children as a present reality. We present it as a historic event, something to look back on. And that was good then, but not necessarily today, is the attitude that a lot of people have. But we don't teach Declaration of Independence in the present tense, you know, or Constitution. This is our Constitution. This wasn't Adam's Constitution. This is, you know, or Madison's Constitution. This is our Constitution. It is ours. And you have to own it in every generation. It's got to be your Constitution in every generation. And that's what Moses is saying. Keep this in a present tense context. So he's talking when he says, you saw God in the on fire on the mountain. That's you. That's not your grandpa. That's your fire. That's your voice that you heard. Okay? That's God speaking to you. So, I didn't do that. Okay. He's also telling them not to make idols. And what he's saying is, when you saw what happened on Mount Horeb, God did not appear to you in some form that you could copy. So you're not supposed to be putting together an idol of any sort. No human form, male, female, no animal form, no fishies, no half human, half fishies, like the Philistines had. You don't make pictures of living beings. You can do flowers and plants, and if you take a look at the art that you'll see in virtually every temple, there is no human form in the art. If you look at Jewish art, there's no human, animal form in that art. It's floral. So they're very careful not to make an image of God like we did in the Sistine Chapel. You know, not good. But then nobody should be worshiping the ceiling in the Sistine Chapel either. Okay? But Moses is emphasizing that because what he's telling them in this speech is that if you start doing that stuff, then the guarantees are canceled. You're not going to be able to live in the land. Okay? I'm going to take you out of the land. I'm going to scatter you all over the creation if you start making idols and start bowing down and worshiping idols. Well, how does this figure in? Well, this is Josiah's reform. Okay? What happened to the northern kingdom? Very quickly, you see that the northern kingdom is adopting paganism. And, there might be a blend of paganism and Yahwism, but you can't do that. You can't have a multi-god Judaism. And and they got carried off by the Assyrians. And guess what? They got scattered all over the world. Shazam! They started making idols. There you go. All right. So the next section has something to do with that. The Babylonian exile is predicted in here, beginning of verse 21. And this again goes back to what we were talking about last week about ultimate responsibilities. The Lord was angry with me because of you, and he vowed I should not cross the Jordan, that I should not enter the good land that the Lord your God is giving for your possession, for I am going to die in this land without crossing over the Jordan. But you are going to cross over and take possession of the good land. So be careful not to forget the covenant that the Lord your God made with you, and not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything that the Lord God has forbidden you. For the Lord your God is a devouring fire, a jealous God. When you have had children and children's children and become complacent in the land, if you act corruptly by making an idol in the form of anything and provoking him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will soon utterly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. So there's a prediction of the Babylonian captivity in here. But it's also depending on when this thing was written, it's also a prediction of what happened to the northern kingdom too. This is interesting. The Lord will scatter you among the people, only a few of you will be left among the nations where the Lord will lead you. There you will serve other gods made by human hands, objects of wood and stone, and neither see nor hear, nor eat nor smell. From there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you search after him with all your heart and soul. In your distress, when all these things have happened to you in time to come, you will return to the Lord your God and heed him. Because the Lord your God is a merciful God, he will neither abandon you nor destroy you. He will not forget the covenant with your ancestors that he swore. So even if you don't live here, you can still practice the faith where you are. And just because you don't live here doesn't mean that there's a suspension of the rules. Okay? Now consider, after the Babylonian captivity, ostensibly what was going on, especially with the previous books of the Pentateuch, is that they're making an appeal to the Persian king to come back to their land. And in the process of that, they are reestablishing the covenant with God and the laws that God had given them. And now the people in Babylon and Persia are beginning to recapture the law and follow the law in a foreign land. And the proof that God had not abandoned them would be when the king of Persia allows them to return to their homeland. Okay, which happened. And so Moses is telling you that there's not been a God like this ever before, where people have actually heard the voice of a God. Now, some pagan religions cheated, and they would have an idol and somebody standing behind the idol talking. Something like the Wizard of Oz. Okay. The closest a lot of them came to it was with, what were those ladies called? I'll think of it in a minute, but the Greeks had them. Every culture's had them. Every pagan culture. The Vestal virgins who predict all kinds of things. You go and ask them questions, and they give you double talk answers. Things haven't changed much. Anyway. But just be aware that that's what Moses is telling them. That even when you're scattered to another place, that you can be restored, that God will restore you. And in modern times, in my lifetime, this has really happened. Now, granted, the motivation for it happening was horrific, but it happened. And people did return to the homeland, and they've established that. And as bad as the countries that are arrayed against Israel right now think that they are, they haven't got a prayer. They have not got a prayer. I've already seen it. Because I was called up for the 73 war, and I was, it was my turn to do the, what do you call it? Anyway, I was posted to the intel feed for the Post. So we were getting everything top secret in the world was coming in to this thing. And it was my job, if something really big time happened, that I would alert the duty officer to, I was a duty officer there, but I would alert the duty officer at Corps and tell them we need to be on alert, if an alert message came in. So, but I watched the 73 war unfold. I went through all the traffic from the start of the war until the day that I was mobilized for it, because I almost went over there. And when I was going through the traffic, I said, there is no way in the world that these people are going to win. Absolutely no way in the world. They can't take these kinds of losses and prevail. Because this isn't this is not a war that lends itself to a prolonged guerrilla operation. This is heavy tank, infantry, Air Force stuff going on. And whatever's going to happen is going to be decisive. And there wasn't any way in the world that it could have been decisive for Israel, except it was. It was amazing. I could not believe the turnaround. I could not believe the turnaround. It's just hard to describe. They lost so much. They lost so much. But God and Richard Nixon pulled them out.
More God.
Maybe so, but Richard had the tanks. It was kind of a fortuitous thing. We were in the process of upgrading our armor from M48 tanks, which was not a great tank really, to M60s, which was a better tank. Okay, but the National Guard wasn't supposed to be getting M60s for years. And what Richard did was he shipped all of the National Guard tanks, the M48s, over to Israel. And they had lost so much armor. He just bled the National Guard. And then the National Guard got M60s. But, that was one of the factors that turned the tide. And the other factor was these people really believed in what they were doing. They were fighting for their lives. There wasn't going to be a conditional surrender if they lost. It was going to be totally unconditional and genocidal. So they didn't have an option. There was nowhere to go. And when there's nowhere to go, you don't go anywhere. But I've seen the hand of God intervene. I really have. It was amazing, because that was an absolutely miraculous thing. Even with good generalship and everything else, there's no way that they should have won. But that not only
How beat down were they?
they lost something like 2/3 of their Air Force. They lost over half of their tanks. Their infantry was decimated. They were being attacked on 3 sides by like 5 nations. There's no way. And they were outnumbered many times in equipment, and they were outnumbered in personnel, and they were outnumbered in aircraft. The enemy was employing new weapons, anti-tank missiles that we had not encountered before, Israel had not encountered before. And Israel had a great deal of chutzpah when they started that war, or when the Arabs started the war. The Israelites thought that they were invincible. And, they got taken to the woodshed, the first part of it. There was another thing that saved them. The Egyptians were following, and the Syrians, they were all following Russian tactics. Now you can see how effective Russian tactics are these days. But the Russians put everything on a timetable, a very rigid timetable. And if you can do something to disrupt that timetable, they don't know what else to do. So the Egyptians crossed the Suez Canal, and they did a really magnificent job of it. It was a military wonder, the way that they crossed the Suez Canal. And they overwhelmed the Israelis, who were posted too lightly along the canal, and they hardly took any losses at all. But they got to the stopping point where you're supposed to replenish. They didn't need to replenish, but they stopped anyway. And that gave the Israelis enough breathing space to regroup and to counterattack and to do it, effectively. But The Russians were using World War II tactics, and they still are. So, they're slow learners. Okay. Then Moses set apart on the east side of the Jordan 3 cities, and we've talked about these. These are 3 cities 40, to which a homicide could flee. These are cities of refuge, and they're on the east side of the Jordan, and he delineates where they're going to be, what tribes they're under. And then the last part of the address is, this is the law that Moses set before the Israelites. Now, chapter 5 is going to go over the 10 Commandments again, but they're not just going to be enumerated. They're going to be a little bit, there's going to be some context attached to them in chapter 5. But he's talking about, these are the decrees and the statutes and ordinances that Moses spoke to the Israelites. See, here you got most of this stuff is in the first person. And then you get to the end of the chapter and they're writing in the third person. So, if Moses was the author, why would he switch from first to third? You know? In the land of King Sihon, the Amorites who reigned at Heshbon, whom Moses and the Israelites defeated when they came out of Egypt, they occupied the land of King Og of Bashan. 2 kings of the Amorites on the east side of the Jordan, 48 from Auror, which is on the edge of the Wadi Arnon, as far as Mount Sirion, which is Hermon, together with all the Arabah on the east side of the Jordan as far as the Sea of Arabah under the slopes of Pisgah. There you go. All the way to North Carolina. So, the last part of this says, look, this is just a hint of what you're going to be able to do. We've already accomplished this. This is just a hint of what you're going to do when you go to the west side of the Jordan. You're going to take all of that. Okay, same way we took this, you're going to take all of that. Okay. So the first part of chapter 5 picks up at the very end of chapter 4, but then it goes into a reiteration of the 10 Commandments, which we'll do next week. Lord willing, creek don't rise. Okay. Any questions?
Thank you, Dennis Levitt, for a wonderful lesson this morning.
Okay. You learn something every day, you know? But this is, the Bible, generally speaking, in Christianity is taught as a monolithic document, and it's absolutely not. It's not. So you see the hand of various writers, various times. Different circumstances change the story. And just, be aware that some parts move on from other parts. And we need to be aware that it is possible to move on from some parts to another as well. But we have to be careful where we move and how we move. And to remember the bedrock of our faith. That's the main thing. Is just make sure you understand the bedrock of your faith. And there are going to be a lot of different interpretations as we go through life and through generations. But some things don't change. And so there is 2 kinds of truth in here. There's a truth with a capital T and truth with a small t. Okay, the truth with a capital T is immutable and forever, and the truth with a small t we can talk about. All right, so God bless you. Thanks for being here. Hope you enjoyed the lesson.
I sure did. Thank you very much.